Hello, and welcome to this Gartner webinar, Impactful Storytelling for IT Leaders, Key Story Structure Models for Success. This presentation will provide actionable, objective insight, expert guidance, and solutions that enable faster, smarter decisions and stronger performance on your most critical priorities. I'm Kelly, your moderator for this session. Before we get started, I have a few tips to help enhance your webinar experience. Around the video player, you'll find a variety of ways to interact with the session. We encourage you to participate by clicking the Ask the Speaker box to submit your questions and thoughts throughout this program. You can either submit a question anonymously, or if you choose, your name, title, and company can be visible along with your question. Navigate to the bottom of the page to download relevant resources. Throughout the program, you can rate this session and share feedback on the insights provided. To submit your rating, locate the Rate Session link below the player. A box will open for you to select 1 to 5 hearts. Please note that 5 hearts is the top rating. Share your feedback on the insights provided in the Leave Further Feedback box and click Send. This webinar is being recorded. You can watch this presentation again and find more great insights on demand at gartner.com/webinars. Now, I'd like to welcome Gartner Distinguished Vice President Advisory Analyst, Bruce Robertson. Bruce, thanks for joining us, and now I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kelly. I really appreciate the opportunity to work with you all today and to share some of the things we're learning as we work with our clients on doing storytelling. And we have definitely seen that using some structures to help us manage our stories is going to help us be more effective. Today's agenda is pretty straightforward. I'm going to give you an introduction to the general idea of storytelling, and then I want to show you that I'm going to use a case study as an example throughout, and then we're going to go into each of the structures for a business value story, where we're going to use a storyboard structure, and then secondly, for a human value story, where we're going to use the 3-act structure. We'll spend a little time on avoiding some of the common pitfalls that we see in storytelling, and then, surprise, I'm going to show you how to do it with Gen AI as an inspiration building tool, not to create your stories, but to give you inspiration for some stories that you can make on your own. That's our agenda for today. Let's get started. So the first idea is just to understand that what we're really talking about is 2 different kinds of stories. And the reason we need 2 different ones is because we need to appeal to, if you will, sort of 2 types of ways of seeing the world, perceptions. We have the rational perception perspective, and we have a more emotional perception perspective. And we need to leverage both of these perspectives in influencing people. So on the rational side, we're going to talk about what are the business value issues that really are important for the influencing campaign you might have. So today I'm going to talk primarily about using this in the context of having an IT organization need to influence its business partners to make investments. But honestly, these tools can be used for any situation. It's just a matter of identifying who you need to influence. And either way, what you're going to need is a business value story. You'll see a great deal of research at Gartner on value stories. It's almost all about this kind and getting the right KPIs, for example. But that's not enough, because what we find is that by adding the human value story, we get that more human perspective on what the value is. And that becomes a much more effective appeal to add to your business value story. So really what we're saying is we want to do both. And when you're influencing any particular stakeholder, make sure you're doing both, and you'll have a better outcome for your influencing campaign. Now, it's not enough to create these 2 types of stories, and I'm going to show you how to do that. But it is also important for you to remember that what you need to do is to continue to get review and critique of your stories and recraft them to make them better over time. Also, you can really learn a lot about your stories if you start testing them with your key stakeholders, so they can tell you whether that story sounds good to them. And if you can't get to the ultimate stakeholder, you need to say, you need to say yes to a big budget item, What you might look for is other stakeholders on the way to that person. So maybe their direct reports are somebody you can talk to. Maybe somebody else who's influenced them would be someone you could talk to see what they did. So there's a lot you can learn by testing your stories before you go live with them for the final cut, right? For the big meeting or whatever. Best to have honed your craft. Now today I'm going to use an example from a case study that we have published at Gartner.com. It's for the company Vizient, and they are in the medical business. They're trying to transform their healthcare delivery. And this case study I'm going to draw from, so I wanted to make sure that you would see that I'm picking out things in my examples that are from real companies. So this is the case study. I'm going to highlight some of the solution highlights that you're seeing here. I'm going to talk about this idea of co-creating roles for rolling out Gen AI to these people, and how we're going to have a set of people called, they call theirs the Digital Employee Experience Team. I'm going to call it an enablement team, and that they're going to go out and work with people to co-create what that future job will be, asking questions like this. They're going to gather information. For example, here's Sam, the programmer or software engineer, and we're looking at how he spends his time at work, and then asking how is it going to change that job, and also is it going to change how Sam thinks about his job. For example, if I now no longer a coder, am I a code enhancer? Right? That's different. It's changing the identity of that job for Sam. He might like that, he might not. But the thing is, we've got to actually go out and find out. And then finally, there could be some work-life benefits from this. Maybe Sam doesn't have to work 10 hours. Maybe you can work only 8. This is the evidence we need to show that the solution of rolling out Gen AI has an impact, not just on our bottom line through productivity, but also for Sam as a human being. So here are some of the results that came from the case study. We are looking at the reduced effort, the increased speed, improved quality, et cetera, generally adoption by programmers. Also, of course, some employee outcome examples. And you'll see me echo these in the case studies that I do using our structures. Finally, the actual results from SAM include things like reduced time on problem solving by 35%. You'll see I'll quote the improved quality of 15% improvement in code quality. Now, overall, the results for this overall rollout campaign of using Gen AI for a whole swath of different segments of their employees, that they're getting an increased number of employees trained in the tools, and also increasing the number of employees who are using it daily. These are some of the things that any campaign to roll out Gen AI would want to be looking at. So that's our quick case study overview, so that you'll at least have that context for the examples I'm going to show. Now let's dig into what are the storyboard structures for our business value stories. And I'm going to start by saying, we would love to get your questions at the end of this section. I'm going to come to a point where I'm going to open up and ask questions for each of the sections today. So please, as you're thinking about and maybe jotting down what your takeaways are, you can also jot down what questions and even put them into our Q&A panel. So what is a business value story? A simple definition we use is that it is about investments. Investments your business is going to make in technology, et cetera, to get business value. So we want to talk about these investments, not spend or budget. We want to talk about investments. An IT shop is shepherding an investment toward its value proposition. So we want to talk about how that value proposition is coming true. If it's for a past project, we want to say it did come true. If it's for a project we're in the middle of, well, we want to talk about how it's paying off over time. We don't want to wait until the very end to talk about only the last bit of the results. We want to start showing results right away. So we're going to need to use these kinds of stories as progress stories. And we want to show progress now. And one of the ways we're going to have to do this is via leading indicators, not just lagging ones, like revenue, cost, and risk. We're going to need to use metrics like business process improvement metrics, or customer experience CX metrics, or if it's for internally focused things, it could be employee experience metrics. The key is we need to have these more leading metrics to directly connect our work to, and then link those to the lagging metrics. So we want to show all of these things. And if you're thinking about, we haven't even started the project yet, and what do? Then we're talking about what are the expected benefits and what are the leading indicators that we can track during the execution of the project to see that we're making progress. So a business value story is about an investment that's being made. Now, it's not much about what IT itself is doing. It's all about what they get, not about what you're doing or delivering. Now, if they ask about your Gantt chart for exactly how it's going to roll out, fine, you have that available. But what they really want to know is, if I give you this money to do that, what am I going to get? I don't just want the software solution. I want a business process improvement or a customer experience improvement, because I know at a business level, those are going to lead to the lagging indicators of revenue increase, cost reduction, or say profitability, and other risk improvements. So that's what a business value story is. In an earlier webinar that you will see, we're going to show you the link for, we have more information about how to do that part of the storytelling for business value stories. But today I'm going to move directly on to discussing the way to structure that story. And we're going to use a structure called a storyboard. Now, we didn't make this up. The storyboard is, in fact, a structure that's used in Hollywood to describe things, and it's used everywhere. And it's a very nice, convenient way to think about what the story is you want to tell. Now, you can see here, it is composed of effectively 3 sections. At the beginning, you're doing an introduction to kind of say, why am I even here? We also advise that you have some kind of an aha. Like, what is it that's going to make people put down their phone and start paying attention? How do you get them to start looking at you directly and not looking at something else? Often an interesting fact might be interesting. So you'll see some examples of this in the example I create. And the idea is to get them ready to listen. And then you're going to talk about the main section. Now, what we suggest is that you use the rule of 3 here. You're going to get 3 or so points or takeaways that you want them to know when we're done. So no matter how much time you have to influence, you want to make sure you're going to talk about these 3 things. If you have a lot of time, you can spend a lot of time on exactly that takeaway and what are the facts and examples. So yes, you can have more slides. But what you want to make sure is that you very much understand what's the first thing I need to talk about, what's the second thing, and what's the third thing, and oh, by the way, what is the order of those things, or what I've labeled here as the story arc? Why are you talking about the first one first? Now, just a sideline, if you think you have 10 things to influence on, just know that's not going to work. It's too much. By the time you get to number 7, they've forgotten number 2 and 3. And if you do 10, they're more likely to remember the worst one in the 10 and not the best one. So when you're talking to a particular case stakeholder, you want to make sure you know which 3 are most important for them. Those are the ones you need to harness. Now, if they ask about something else, sure, you can have that number 5 item ready to go. But you need to know that if you only have time to do a quick thing, which are the 3 that are top of mind? So for each one of those, again, you want to understand that you need to convey the takeaway for that section, and you need to show facts and examples that support your assertion about that takeaway. Now, the last area is the idea of when you're done, of course, you're going to kind of remind them of what those 3 things were. So remember now these 3 things. And then you're going to make sure you don't lose the opportunity to have a call to action. If you're influencing, you don't just want to go in and talk and hope they understand and hope they figure out what to do next. Instead, you need to be very direct about what you should be doing next, or we should be doing next. So in a typical situation of trying to influence to get an investment buy-in, the call to action is, we recommend that we take this step. We need you to sign off on this, right? You need to ask that. Don't assume they know what to do, right? So control your own destiny in that way. Now, putting all these together allows us to have a quick outline of exactly what it is that we want to do to influence someone. Now, I'm very specifically suggesting that before you throw the slides together that do this, that you actually use our simple template or make up your own that's going to actually let you outline what your talk track's going to be. Creating an outline first is going to be extremely helpful because you can use it to quickly get feedback on what your argument is. The last thing you want to do is spend a month honing out 3 great things with fantastic slideware, and when you first test it on somebody, they go, I don't get number 2 and number 3. Right? You should have learned that a long time ago. So using the storyboard structure allows you to have a quick outline that you can share directly. Try this. Spend just 20 minutes or 30 minutes together with the team, creating what you think the argument's going to be and logging it down this way. We do this in our storytelling workshops. We don't give you a lot of time, so you're not going to have a chance to put slides together. What you do have time to do is to see if you can make a rational argument. So that's the storyboard structure. What we then have added to it a little bit is this idea of what is the starting emotion and the ending emotion for an event of doing influencing. Like, where do they start? Are they anxious? Are they concerned? Are they don't know what to do? And then what do you want to leave them with when you're done? This is a little bit toward thinking of, we need to start treating people as actual human beings here. And here's one way to do it that it lets you very quickly sort of challenge what the emotional content's going to be and what you need to get to the end. We have a set of things to think about. The rule of 3 I mentioned, being succinct. What is the order? What's the aha? And what is your call to action? We use these kinds of checklists when we're working with clients to help make sure that we're following the kinds of things I just talked about when I was showing you the main structure. We also use an empty template that allows you to fill in things, and then we fill them in. So here's an example of filling this in related to the Vizient case study that I showed you quick snippets from before. You can see I've got an introduction here that simply buying GenAI licenses for everyone won't work, plus it'll cost too much. We need to do it differently. And the aha is many companies struggle to scale GenAI adoption and prove business value while not alienating our employees. You could go ahead and quote some Gartner research there if you like, to put some numbers on it. Now, the 3 things that I might highlight from that case study are that we want to empathize with the employees in their work context, but then we also want to empathize with them more in their life context as a human being, not just as an employee. And finally, we want to, in fact, co-design roles by leveraging our enablement team. So if you look at the first takeaway, I'm basically saying that we're going to need to segment our employees and invite early adopters. We're going to ask how it's going to change their job, what task they should delegate, higher value task to focus on instead, that kind of thing. And then our data is going to be about the effect on their job. Things like reduced effort, or as I mentioned earlier, improved quality by 15%. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm a little bit quoting the data to show an example of we're already getting some of these benefits when we've done it, say, with SAM. And then you can see the effect on the human would be, say, 1 hour back a day, which is a nice, good thing for SAM. And we want to make sure SAM is happy because otherwise SAM might choose not to work here anymore. And then on the co-designing, yes, we need to get our enablement team to do this interviewing work. We've got to track the results of the campaign and coordinate the sharing of our early peer adopter results with others that haven't yet started on their adoption to really build momentum for the overall rollout. So our data and example include, of course, the data that the Vizient case study showed that 100% of their developers are trained so far, with the 70% using the tools daily. Now, our advice is that you adopt a human-centric approach, and it will pay our dividends and lower our risks. So our call to action is we need to establish that Gen AI enablement team. We need to establish a community of practice for everybody involved to talk with each other. So Sam and everybody else can talk to themselves and learn from each other. And finally, the real call to action here is that we need to now go beyond Sam. We need to pick the next, say, additional employee segments to work on directly. So our call to action is let's identify those and let's get these other things done. Now, what I hope to do is to move an audience in this from feeling frustration or concern about our Gen AI plans to, in fact, having optimism about them and confidence about them. Now, of course, I want you to think about that's the first cut. You need to review and critique that with people that you trust, stakeholders you can talk to, and then recraft it and make it better. Now, one thing we've used is a checklist like this, where when you have somebody that's reviewing your story, you can put these principles out there that we were talking about earlier and say, did this example show you that the rule of three was followed? What details worked? What suggestions do you have for improvement? Any other ideas? So what we're trying to do is to make storytelling be something you do as a group, as a team, or at least when you get one person to listen to your story or look at your storyboard, they can give you some useful feedback. It's always useful to get feedback before you go live with the most important story you're going to tell this year. Now, with that in mind, I'm talking about the business value story and the storyboard structure. Let's see if we've got any questions from you about how to do this or perhaps issues you've run into. So, Kelly, what do we have? All right, I'm looking at the questions. Which are most effective when trying to reframe the narrative around IT in the face of a small but vocal group of critics so that a broader community hears a more balanced and constructive story? Thank you, Javier. What I would just say is, in general, your goal is not to immediately negate everybody else's opinions you don't agree with. Your job, on the other hand, is to show that there are other ways to look at it. You're reframing their view into a different view. So you're right. If people are telling negative stories, you may want to make sure that they hear the positive ones. So what are those, right? So people may be saying, IT is doing a really awful job about this. But if you have stories of 2 or 3 other business areas we've worked with maybe 2 or 3 other actual individuals from your company who are saying, well, that's not my experience. My experience is IT is doing a great job on this. And here's my story. Then now you've got the people who were only influenced by the people who had a negative opinion. Now they're seeing some of the positive stories come out. So you're absolutely right. You want to understand what the negative stories are so you can counteract them with the good ones, not directly contradicting a negative story, because you know what? That might actually be true. It might be real. That for that situation when we did that, it didn't work. But over here, it is working. And so we would hope to have the opportunity to work with you and fix your story from bad to good too. So that's a really good idea. Some people are asking about other approaches to storytelling. We're not saying you can't use those as well, but we have found this approach of these 2 kinds of stories and these structures to be really a nice way to get going. And I see questions about actually how did Vizient measure certain things. Well, if Sam is doing some kind of programming, it's typically being done within the context of a tool that manages that work. Often Jira is a good example. And so there is data from a tool like that about how many, say, stories are getting done, user stories, and so on. There's all sorts of data you can mine to get at the kinds of numbers that you're seeing in the Vizient case study. Of course, not all of us have automated numbers capturing tools, so we may have to look at other factors about maybe how many reports are getting done, or we're doing more of them in a given week than we did last week. So that's a productivity improvement. Somebody asks, how do you deal with disagreement? Mark, thank you for that. You show what you know to be true. And I will just say that as you think about trying to sell your ideas to a larger group of people, remember that you're never going to convince them all up front. So it's actually okay that there are people who are quite skeptical or indeed negative about the thing you're trying to get a lot of people to do, like Gen AI adoption. So what you can do, instead of just saying and giving up at the beginning because some people are worried about it, you want to manage an influencing campaign or a change campaign. You want to find the people who are getting a very different experience, make sure that they're getting very good results, and then start to share those results with others. That's what the storytelling helps you do. Sam's experience in adopting Gen AI is going to help other programmers really understand better what it means. They need to hear peer stories, people just like them doing the kinds of things that are being recommended, and they need to hear them right from Sam's mouth. And honestly, that's why the storyboard that we've talked about so far is really not enough. We really do need to use the human value story as well. We need Sam as our champion, or at least early adopter, to very much be front and center of helping other people see how it will affect them. And we want Sam to tell that story, not us. We don't know what Sam's thinking, but our job as a storyteller is to go find out. So I'm going to segue now into our second major storytelling idea, which is the 3-act structure for a human value story. So what is it again? Well, I like to say it this way. It's about the human experience of receiving the business value over time in more emotional terms about what's different now. Oh my gosh, before I had this, I was taking this long, or I had to work 10 hours. Now I can get the same amount of work done in 8. I can go home on time and feed the kids. It's about what's different now, visible via their own words. Now, we generally will say that that's important to do directly from the people who are having that experience. You're going to want to go interview them. Now, there are cases where we would be talking about our own team, but mostly we're talking about the people who get the value. We need to hear from them what it is. Now, the very first thing that a human value story is going to give you is proof. If you just say, oh, all this stuff is true, well, why would I believe you? In IT, of course, we deal with vendors all the time, and they tell us their stuff's going to be magic. And we don't trust that exactly. We have to go verify. How do we verify it? Well, one way is you call Gartner, because we've talked to all these people that have already done it, and we have a good sense of a large-scale view of what's valuable in a given tool or project. But you're going to look at the case studies on the vendor's website, right? And you're not only going to listen to them, you're going to actually go call them up and find out if what they put on the website is real. Now, for a minute, consider you're trying to sell something, which is what you're doing here, and you need your own case studies because they're proof of value. It's like the certificate of reality for what you're asserting is the value that we would get. Seeing somebody else get that value, that social proof is an important piece of your influencing campaign. You can't do it on your own. You need your customers to tell you they got that. Really, you're going to do exactly what your vendors are doing. You're going to need to get a case study. The more case studies you have about the value you've created, the better. Each of those case studies is going to have the business value story, like using a storyboard to convey that, but it also needs a human value story. Now, for that human value story, the more human experience in their own words, what story would they tell about the experience of going through the changes that you did and what it feels like now? So yes, we need a story structure, and we're going to adopt one that, again, is widely used. We call it the 3-act story, but it's also known as the hero's journey. And the general idea is, think Luke Skywalker. You're introduced to this character. He's the hero. He has a desire. And what is his desire? He wants to fly those cool jets and whatever they are, spacecraft. I can't remember the name of them. And, but he's got a few obstacles about getting that dream to come true, doesn't he? Right? So there are a number of things going on. And then finally, at the end of the movie, you realize he has actually gotten to the point where he is the Jedi. He can fly all those great things. He's well respected. Now, you need to think about the story you're going to tell about the person that is receiving your value. You need to introduce people to your hero. You need to describe what are the desires of that person. What are the obstacles keeping them from being successful? And then what is the resolution of that once they've adopted whatever it is, or we've done what we said? What is that resolution that they get? So that's the template, if you will. Of course, again, we have checklists to get you to check. Does it have people in it? You'd be surprised the number of ones we review when we say do a human value story, and they're still not talking about real people. They're either talking about fake people, or even worse, they're talking about a non-person called a user. I don't know about you, but I don't think a user is exactly me. And so you're going to want to think about, for the staff adoption kinds of things, like in this Gen AI example, you want to think about, well, what are the particulars of different people? Now, if we're talking about selling to a larger audience of high-level business people and high-level executives, then again, you're going to want to match an executive story so that you can use that to sell to other executives. But it's going to be great if in your own situation, you can highlight the actual executives in your own firm that you've already done this with and have them be part of your influencing campaign. In fact, when you're trying to get Sally to do it and she says, well, I'm not sure, you can say, why don't you go talk to Paul? Because we did this for Paul last quarter, and he definitely thought it was valuable. But don't listen to me. Go ahead and talk to one of my happy customers and see if you believe them better. Again, social proof. The more you have real people in the story, the better it can be. You need details. It needs to be a real human being. You need stakes. Something is important here. You need emotions to be visible. So when you start doing the interviewing, you're trying to get them to open up. And you want to see what are the changes. They should describe how different it is now, and in a way that is very evocative. Now, here's my example from the Vizient case study. This is extremely loosely based on that case study because I got to say, I didn't interview Sam. In fact, I'm not really sure Sam is a real person in the published case study we did. I think so, but I didn't do the case study. But if I were on that team and I was wanting to have a human value story from Sam, it would probably add up to something like this. Here's my hero, Sam. He's a great programmer that we already have. We want to see if he's interested in seeing if this new Gen AI stuff is going to make his job easier and more interesting. And he'd want to learn some skills that might help his career. Now, the problem is my boss is pushing this on me, and I'm kind of scared about what that means. I'm not sure I know what that means. It seems hard to figure out where best to apply all this stuff. And I'm worried about this leading to losing jobs, whether it's my own or maybe other people on my team. Like, is that going to happen? So as you can see, I have lots and lots of worries about what's going on, obstacles, you might say, to my adoption. There could be many other things that are more, not so much what Sam himself sees, but other things that are problematic, systematic issues. Like, guess what? We didn't buy enough resource for a chat GTP. And so half the time I use it, I get, we're full kind of messages. So that would be a barrier too. But the resolution is now, okay, we've gone through, we've used our enablement team to help Sam with asking all those questions that we talked about earlier, making sure that we identify the effects on the work, as well as the identity of Sam. And we've done all of that. And now here's what Sam might say if we were to interview him. The enablement team was actually really helpful. And I am actually more productive at my work, and my customers are really noticing. And in fact, my boss noticed. I like what I'm doing now better than before, and I'm not as afraid of those negative effects. And I see how we're adjusting to using it here. And honestly, given that I'm one of the first people going, I'm kind of proud of the fact that I get to help some others, given my experience, to also kind of move forward in adopting this. Now, if you have that story, you're going to have better results rolling out your Gen AI adoption. It's great for your influencing campaign, but make no bones about it. I have outlined that story, and you could outline it as maybe a story you need, but the best thing to do is to go get Sam to tell that story. And how are you going to do that? You're going to go interview them. You're going to ask people to tell their own stories. And not only that, you're going to help to make them better. You're going to use a lot of tactics to make that happen. One thing is, of course, you want to ask them open-ended questions about what was their experience. You don't want to tell them, did it feel better? No, you just want to ask, how did it feel after you started to use it on a regular basis? What was that like? And just let Sam talk. So you do want to go get those stories, but you also want to kind of be a good interviewer. So what we're going to say is you need to get good at interviewing if you really want great human value stories. You can ask very specific questions, but you want to make sure they're very open-ended. Things like, well, what did you think about it? What did you feel about it? How did it help you? How are things different now? And then listen. Or even better yet, when you listen, ask a follow-up question that digs deeper. Like, why was that the case? And of course, maybe the secret weapon now is more and more of our clients are seeing that using video to do this is absolutely what they want to do. So I talked to a client the other day. It's like during the call, he goes, okay, you're bringing your iPhone and taking the video, and I'm going to be the one asking the questions. We good? Okay, we're going to do that tomorrow. I'm scheduling Jim now for the interview, and we're going to use that as a video on Friday in our influencing. Woo, that was quick. You can do that too. So again, with the human value story, you want to come up with a draft, maybe a good video, and have it reviewed and critiqued, and then recraft it to get it better. You might have to interview Sam more than once. We have a checklist. Do you have the people, the details, et cetera? Which are the details that are working? Where are my suggestions for improvement? And what are my other ideas? Or an even more general one is, in listening to your story, here were the takeaways that I saw in your story. And you could try to match that. So let's do that work. Now, I bet you have a few questions about this. Let's go see. So I'm seeing questions about, is there anything to add, thank you, Retta, about this, to add about body language and presentation format or style? Yes. How you present, literally what you look like when you do it, that is part of getting better at influencing. So I'd encourage you to do whatever your organization has as ideas for that. But one of the things is, of course, know your stuff cold and hopefully not have to read it off a piece of text and, a sheet of paper or whatever. And by using these structures, I think you're going to get more comfortable with actually doing that kind of work. Yes, you're going to want great graphics that help you sell. You're going to want to make sure, and we'll cover this a little bit in my next section about some of the other things. I like your example of AI enablement since it has clear enterprise-wide value. Jaden says, how about identifying the right stakeholders for smaller scale stuff, like sponsorship of a particular certification? Again, the idea here is no matter how big or how small, you need to understand what is the value proposition, the business value proposition for doing it to the stakeholders that it matters to. And then you need to have, as soon as you can, the kind of human value story that shows that when we do it, it matters. We get the results we're looking for, and the people actually say they got them. So whatever the target is, it could be big, it can be small. If it's small, you may only need one. But if it's large, you're going to need different stories for different stakeholders, executives, managers, staff. Those are going to be different stories. Both business value and human value will feel different for them. So that would be something to do. If you have a very fact and figure orientated executive, is this the right approach? Well, the business value story is going to have the facts and figures. But what we note is even if that's what they say they are, these other human value stories will be effective in influencing them. Try it and see if it doesn't in fact help. Particularly when you have situations where, let's say, an executive knows that some of their people are seeing value. You might want to bring the stories of their own people getting this value. So, for example, they'll renew the contract for next year or whatever. You might want to bring those stories to your convincing campaign because they're going to say, oh, I don't see the value. And you'll say, well, these 6 of your employees see the value. Here are their stories. Here's Jim, Sally, Javier, etc. So it's not you. It's their own people who are seeing the value. So bringing that information to bear will help. Okay, let's talk about our next section. How about just generally the pitfalls you can run into? And oh my gosh, the biggest one is TMI, baby. As an IT group, we are so good at trotting out all the information about what we're going to do and showing incredible amounts of detail. And this just puts the business audience to sleep. They don't care about any of it. They don't care about what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, at least not at first. They may need to know, and they may ask, then you can tell them. But mostly we spend way too much time talking about information most of the people we're trying to influence don't care about. So please try to follow some of these ideas for avoiding some of these pitfalls. The first idea is, well, adopt the rule of 3, right? Don't try to tell them 10 things. Try to figure out which 3 things are going to be the most impactful for that particular stakeholder. This will vary by different stakeholders. So you might have 10 things in your quiver, 10 different things you can try to do. But what you can't do is pretend that we're going to tell all 10 to one person and have them reject 7 of them. That's not what we want. So be clear on which 3 things are the most important. Practice the rule of 3. Okay, next thing is avoid jargon, acronyms, TLAs. Oh yeah, 3-letter acronyms. Things like these. And I've used these all in my life. And you know, I think people know what they are. I actually presented at a conference once, and this is a long time ago, it was at Net World Interop, and I said, I had a slide with the term SNA on it. It was networking. And I said, does anybody remember what SNA stands for? And like 2 hands in the audience raise up. It's like nobody even remembers anymore. But the main point is don't use the jargon and acronyms that people in your audience won't understand. Make sure that those are explained before you use them. Another thing to do is to avoid too much text. Nobody wants to see this on a slide. Now you may have a written thing where you're going to have nice bullet points for your key findings and recommendations like Gartner does in our own research notes, but not for a presentation. You would cut this down to, at minimum, just the bullet points of these things. The rest of it would be, talk track. But typically, we also want to move beyond text in general. We want very large text on slides, not lots of little text. The less, the better. And then, of course, what we also need to show is data. But we do have to be very careful about our data. We don't want to have too much data or just, frankly, just too confusing. Now, looking at the last slide, now looking at this slide, you've probably already put your mind in gear to figure out what it's trying to tell you. Right? You started to read the slide. You started to try to figure out what this is about. You do not want your audience doing that. You want to make it extremely clear what is the information and what is the important information in this picture. Now, this example is a completely nonsense example. I'm sorry I wasted your time in trying to figure it out. Don't do this to your audience. Instead, do something more like this. show a simple chart and make sure that instead of having them read the whole chart, you immediately call their attention to the one number on this chart that matters. And you put the takeaway, the words that somebody should see that are related to why this number is important. So you can see here we have this, takeaway highlighted. If they look at your slide later, they're not going to remember your talk track. You want to make sure the key thing is right there. Now, I'll say also, when we do keynotes at Gartner, we will not even show the graph. We'll just show the number and the takeaway associated with it. That's all that's on the slide. You're pretty sure they're going to remember it if that's all you give them, right? It's hard for them to get confused. So don't confuse your audience. Now, another thing we see in doing graphics is people will put out a graphic and it won't make a lot of sense. So tell me don't tell me, but take a moment to think about what's the difference between these two graphics. Can you tell? Okay, you probably figured it out. It's the text that is trying to show what the interpretation of that data is, not just what the data is. You need to give the insight from the data to your audience, not just the data. This is a difficulty we all face because we all have a lot of data, and we think we got to show it all to people, but we don't. Oh, by the way, here's another one to don't do. Don't have a big spreadsheet with numbers all over the place and start talking about one number out of, 60 on that piece of paper or slide. They will not be paying attention. They're looking at every other number there. You're just confusing them with this. Now, there are certain situations in which that's important, but mostly not. So if you think there's an important number in your spreadsheet, put it on a slide independently of the full spreadsheet. If somebody challenges you on the figure, you can say, I'd be happy to sit down and talk about the details in our spreadsheet. But what you don't want to do is have them spending a lot of time trying to interpret a bunch of data where they don't need to. You've already done it for them. You're in control. Here's one more example. I often will use this slide as my aha for doing storytelling. I did this in the other webinar I'm recommending that you see. But I don't show you this because here you've already tried to figure out what is this trying to show me. And you're just not quite sure what piece of data I'm really trying to talk about here, right? This is better, isn't it? So what I'm telling you here is that CIOs think that influencing stakeholders is the top thing on the list, and some of the other things on their list are also really related to this. So yes, the skills to influence an expanding constituency of stakeholders dominates the development opportunities that CIOs identify for themselves. That is a powerful insight. That's why you're trying to improve your influencing game too. CIO or not. Okay, let's see what the questions are about this discussion. I'm going to go over to what people have put in. Somebody mentioned data storytelling. Well, I think I've kind of gotten to the point here where I'm at least getting to a version of data storytelling where data is a very important part of the story you tell. At Gartner, our DNA experts actually have much more to say about data storytelling, and I would encourage you as clients to go learn much more about that. We have people who can work on that much more detail. Also, in a similar vein, if you're telling a story about, say, cloud computing and the value that's going to bring to your organization, not only do these formal storytelling tactics really help you be better at that job, and that's what these workshops and webinars are about, but when you get down to it, the people that we have that study cloud all the time, they talk to people every day about that particular influencing challenge. You should feel, as a client, welcome to go interrogate them and learn from them, like what seems to work best in which situation. And depending on what vertical industry you're in, we might have people that are going to be able to give you more sort of top-down views of what would be the more effective things for that particular type of business stakeholder in that industry. So we hope to have a number of ways to help. I know I can't give all of that help here today in 1 hour. People are asking for lots and lots of examples. I know that it would be great to have many examples. For those of you who are our clients, we absolutely do this kind of review work to help you getting going. And one more question. I'm working with the business on upgrading and selecting new energy trading and risk management system. What are the 3 most important things I might consider? And then you note in your question, Steve, features, benefits. Well, first of all, benefits, right? That's the general story that we're trying to convey. The business value story is what benefits will they get if we upgrade these solutions? If you're not clear on what that is, and look, let's face it, a lot of times the reason we're doing it is because the vendor has an upgrade, and of course we're supposed to upgrade it. And then somebody finally says, well, why? Do we need any of that? Like, why would we spend the extra money to do that? And time and effort, by the way. I had a CIO once, the big ERP upgrade was on the list for the next year. And when they did a recalculation of their priorities, the business said, no, that's not going to pass the bar. We don't need to do that next year. The benefits you're talking about, it's not that they don't matter, but some other things matter more. Go do those things for us. That's what I would like you to do. So being clear on the benefits that they get, and in fact, connecting what you think those benefits are to the realistic perceptions of your business people is a very, very important thing to do. You can suggest that the value story for this is going to be whatever, and that it's going to get us revenue, but they're not going to believe it. That's why you need to pay attention to the work on connecting the leading to lagging indicators for your metrics to make it clearer about why this change would make it better. What in energy systems, what business processes are going to be improved now, right? And what would that mean to revenue, or in case of energy, maybe risk issues that we face at a business level? If you can't make that connection, they have no reason to say yes to what you're proposing. And then, oh, by the way, if they're kind of not convinced of the value, they don't want to hear anything about all the details about how we're going to do it, right? So you may have to eventually show all the how we're going to do it stuff, but to get the sign off up front, it isn't about that. It's about, can you show that there's real business value to be provided, and in fact, that they care about that specific kind of business value. It's not a shot in the dark. It's trying to match what they show as their priorities. Okay, I have one more thing I want to do before we finish up here, and that is my sort of surprise option, which is how to use Gen AI for this work. And yeah, you can do that. So I have some examples that are using some of the things we've talked about today. I want to say that, the general idea here is I'm going to show you our story prompts, and you can start with those if you like. What they're going to do is highlight the structuring that we've talked about. And really what I found in doing this work is that you just have to keep iterating, much like recrafting your story. You need to tell your story assistant to keep recrafting that story to make it better, and particularly more succinct, right, to get it to be just simpler. I've done 2 things here that I'm going to show you quickly results from, just so you see that it actually can be helpful. One is I put the Vizient case study data that we have into a notebook LLM and asked and ran these prompts against that. So you can add, your own stuff to a tool like that and try that. The other thing I did was just straight ChatGPT, no Gartner research at all. And I asked, without any of primer or anything like that. It gets harder to trust the data you're getting because it's not necessarily based on anything real. But I got to say, I thought it was maybe a little slicker about the storytelling part. So I think doing this and testing your ideas in these different ways is very, very valuable. Of course, it can't be your story, right? You can't just take this and show it to an executive. It's going to be wrong, right? The details are going to be wrong. But what I hope these things will show you is a little bit about, if you feel so uncomfortable about doing this yourself, These things might just get you started and give you some ideas. That's why we say using Gen AI is for inspiration for the story you're going to tell, but it is not creating the story you need to tell. You have to do that with real information from your own situation. So here's an example of a business value prompt. You can see that what we're doing here is kind of introducing what the problem is. You're a CIO, you need to write an influencing story. Here's the situation. And then we're going to follow that 3 steps of the 3 major sections of our storyboard, and having an introduction, a story body with 3 subsections. What are the 3 things we're going to say? And then a closing that includes key actions for my executive leadership committee audience. And then, as you see, I have to spend a lot of time saying, make it more succinct, because, man, I'd get like 3 or 4 pages of this stuff. It's very verbose. Now, for the HVS, the human value story, you can see I'm doing the same kind of thing, setting up the prompt. And then I'm saying, look, follow the 3-act story structure, and then make sure you've got people, details, stakes, emotions, and changes in it. And then, of course, as usual, make that way more succinct. So now I'm going to show you a few examples of the output from these. And I've just got this in a Word document. I thought it would be easy to sort of structure how I show it to you by putting it in outline form. Of course, what it actually produced was just a document, right? So in Notebook LLM, that case, I fed it the Vizient case study stuff, and I used a Notebook LM prompt that was very similar to the one you just saw. And then it gave me back a business value story that looked like this. Now, of course, one thing is to show it actually absolutely has the main structuring elements. But look at some of the detail. I think this is kind of interesting. You don't have to play with Gen AI for long before you're either inspired or terrified. We need to consider what this possible existential shift means for our people. Now, that is a direct quote from the case study. That's what one of the people running the whole thing said. Now, if we go through, we can see here are those story elements that I highlighted in my version of the story: empathizing with the person, not the employee, not just the employee, the co-design with employees, and then the personalizing of leading indicators of productivity and so on. So it did catch a lot of that data. And then the closing, really does kind of show it isn't just about technology. So I thought that wasn't a bad cut. That would have inspired me to do a better one. And then when I did the human value story, again, I have a particular prompt I used, very similar to the one I showed you on the slide. And then it started to give me that kind of output. So it's got 3 acts. And if we delve into, the first act it came up with, it's immediately talking about Sam. Fantastic. There's a person. Essential yet often repeated tasks. He yearned for something. He dreamed of something. You got to get prepared to use emotion words. This is a human value story. Ideally, you want Sam himself, when you interview him, to do this for you. Now, the shadow of uncertainty, that profound uncertainty about how it's going to impact his job responsibility, feel trapped by the tasks he considers menial. This is all the before, right? This is the obstacles he's running into. And he's got roadblock fatigue, his fear of becoming obsolete or a human in the loop with diminished ownership of things. And he's worried about feeling like more like an executor of code than the innovator he wanted to be. Wow, that's something I'd love to fix for Sam. Now, we did what we did, rolled out the stuff, helped him with the team, enablement team, and so on. The collaborative approach, not a top-down mandate, empowered Sam to wholeheartedly experiment. The transformation was remarkable. Experienced, and it starts quoting some of the data. And then Sam's identity definitely shifted from executor of code to fulfilled enhancer of code. Again, because it's in Notebook LLM and it's specifically trained in our case study, it's using actual stuff from the case study. So here, there isn't as much direct hallucination or literally making stuff up. That, of course, is not going to be the case in the ChatGPT one, right? So how about that? What we found was, you do get things like accelerating product demand, and the takeaways are responding to demands and some of the data. Now it's quoting something about Siemens used AI to do something. I don't know where it got that. I don't know if that's true. But what it is at least an example or illustration of how this kind of Gen AI work can really help you. Now, I know we're coming to the end of our work here, our time. I'll just say that my summary of ChatGTP's value and Notebook LLM's value, again, is that we absolutely have to only use it for inspiration. It is not your story. You need to change your story with these inspirations to make yours better. But yours better be real. Yours better be real. Now, I don't have time to take questions on this one because we're at the end of our time. So let me just say that in summary, you can build better stories if you use these different kinds of structures of these two different kinds of stories, that you should continue to craft, critique, and recraft your stories, that you definitely want to learn from testing with key stakeholders. Gartner, if you're a client, we can help you with both formal and very content-oriented reviews. So here is my call to action for you. By tomorrow, review your takeaways. What storytelling tactics and tools attracted you? Plan which of these actions you might take in the next 2 weeks and schedule yourself that work. Put it on your calendar. Make sure you do it. And then in 2 weeks, discuss these actions and the outcomes with your team. What worked? What didn't work? Plan the actions for the next 2 weeks. Keep repeating that cycle. Try to add something to your tool chest every 2 weeks. Obviously, we're adopting an agile sprint style here to get yourself to start without trying to do everything all at once, but to start using any of these tactics right away. So now I'm going to turn it back to Kelly to finish up our conversation today.
Thank you, Bruce, for sharing your insights. Before you go, we've included additional resources at the bottom of the page. A quick reminder that this webinar is being recorded. Watch this presentation again and find more great insights on demand at gartner.com/webinars. Lastly, please rate this webinar on the bottom right of your screens. To submit your rating, click Rate Session below the player. A box will open for you to select 1 to 5 hearts. Please note that 5 hearts is the top rating. Share your feedback on the insights provided in the Leave Further feedback box and click Send. With that, I'd like to again thank our presenter and, of course, thank you for listening. Have a great day.